When you look into the eyes of a monster, you expect only darkness. But what if that darkness swore to set the whole world on fire just for you? Welcome to your BL boyfriend. To make sure you don't miss the rest of this thrilling and passionate journey, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support is vital for the continuation of this series. Enjoy the story. Part 1. The rain was relentless, washing over the city as if trying to cleanse it of its deepest sins. The sky was a bruised shade of purple and black, venting its fury upon the narrow, cobblestone streets. 22-year-old Eli shivered against the biting cold as he pulled down the heavy metal shutters of the small, dimly lit cafe where he worked the late shift. He was a simple soul, an art student trying to navigate the complexities of life, focused on his canvases and the quiet rhythm of his daily routine. His life was a palette of soft watercolors, peaceful and predictable. He had no way of knowing that the masterpiece of his life was about to be splashed with the violent shades of crimson and midnight. As he walked toward his modest apartment, the wind howled through the alleyways, carrying with it the scent of wet asphalt and something metallic. This part of the city was never safe after midnight. Shadows here held secrets that most people preferred to ignore. Suddenly, a muffled groan broke through the rhythmic drumming of the rain. Eli froze. Every instinct told him to run, to disappear into the safety of his locked room, but his heart, that cursed, compassionate heart, wouldn't let him. He swallowed hard, his breath visible in the freezing air, and moved slowly toward the sound, his sneakers splashing quietly in the puddles. Tucked away behind a row of overturned trash bins was a man. He was leaning against a brick wall, gasping for air, his massive frame trembling slightly. He wore a bespoke black suit that was now soaked through, and a dark, spreading stain on his abdomen revealed a wound that was bleeding profusely into the rainwater. His face was obscured by the shadows, but the aura he projected was overwhelming, dominant, dangerous, and utterly predatory. It was the kind of presence that demanded submission without saying a word. Eli reached out a trembling hand, his voice barely a whisper. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" The moment the words left his lips, a powerful, blood-stained hand shot out with impossible speed, gripping Eli's slender wrist with a crushing force. Eli let out a sharp cry of pain as he was yanked forward, and before he could blink, he felt the cold, unforgiving press of metal against his temple. A gun. The man had a firearm pressed firmly against his head, his finger twitching on the trigger. "Take another step," the man rasped. His voice was deep, gravelly, and carried the weight of a death sentence. It sounded as if it had been forged in the very depths of hell. "And I'll paint this wall with your brains." Eli's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he could finally see the man's face. He had sharp, aristocratic features, jet black hair matted to his forehead with sweat and blood, and eyes that were like two pits of obsidian, lethal, yet mesmerizing. Despite the agony he was clearly in, there wasn't a single flicker of weakness in his gaze. Eli forced himself to breathe, realizing that if he showed too much fear, he would be discarded like trash. "You can pull that trigger," he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the shaking in his limbs. "But if you do, you'll bleed out in this alley alone. The choice is yours. You can kill me, or you can let me save you." A flicker of surprise crossed those dark eyes. In his world, people either cowered, fled, or tried to betray him. No one, especially not a fragile, innocent-looking boy with wide amber eyes, had ever stood their ground while staring down the barrel of his gun. The man's iron resolve wavered for a fraction of a second. Slowly, the hand holding the weapon slumped, and he fell into a violent fit of coughing, his body finally giving in to the trauma. Without hesitation, Eli moved in. He slung the man's heavy arm over his shoulder, straining under the weight of the stranger's muscular build. "My apartment is just 2 blocks away. I can't take you to a hospital. They'd report a gunshot wound instantly." The man merely nodded, his consciousness drifting in and out. Eli used every ounce of his strength to haul the giant of a man through the back streets and up the stairs of his crumbling apartment building. Once inside, he managed to lower him onto a worn, faded sofa. Eli scrambled to the bathroom, grabbing a first aid kit, clean towels, a basin of hot water, and a pair of scissors. When he cut through the expensive silk shirt, he saw the jagged wound. The bullet had grazed him deeply, tearing through muscle and skin. Eli took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he began the delicate process of cleaning the injury. Throughout the agonizing procedure, the man didn't let out a single groan. Instead, his jaw remained clenched, the veins in his neck bulging with effort. His dark, predatory eyes never left Eli's face, watching his every move with a terrifying intensity. Why? The man asked suddenly. The word was a low vibration that seemed to fill the small room, cutting through the sound of the rain outside. Why didn't you leave me to die in that gutter? Eli didn't look up, focusing on stitching the edges of the wound with a steady hand. Leaving someone to die is wrong, no matter who they are. My name is Eli, by the way. The man remained silent for a long time. He watched the innocence in Eli's features, the way his cheeks flushed with the effort of his work, and the gentle, almost tender way he handled the bandages. For someone who had spent his life surrounded by betrayal, violence, and the cold pursuit of power, this boy's selfless kindness was disorienting. Lucian, the man said shortly. He didn't give his full name, the name that made world leaders tremble and rivals disappear. Not yet. He wasn't ready to extinguish the light in this boy's eyes just yet. Once the wound was dressed, Eli wiped the sweat from his brow. Okay, Lucian, the bullet didn't stay inside. If you don't get an infection, you'll survive. Sleep now. I'll be right here. For the first time in years, Lucian closed his eyes in a place where he was completely vulnerable. He kept his hand near his weapon, but a strange, unfamiliar sense of peace washed over him in this cramped, art-filled apartment. When the first rays of gray morning light filtered through the window, Eli woke up with a start. He had fallen asleep in a chair next to the sofa, his neck stiff and aching. He looked toward the couch and gasped. It was empty. Lucian was gone. Eli frantically searched the apartment, but there was no sign of the man. The only evidence that the night hadn't been a fever dream was sitting on his small kitchen table. A thick stack of $100 bills, and, resting on top of them, a heavy silver lighter engraved with the image of a soaring hawk. Eli didn't even dare touch the money. He just stared at the lighter, the cold metal reflecting the morning light. That afternoon at the cafe, Eli was a nervous wreck. His mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who was that man? Why had he left so much money without a word? What did the hawk mean? He found himself dropping spoons and mixing up orders, his eyes constantly darting toward the door. Eli, pay attention. Table 4 is waiting for their check, his boss barked, snapping him out of his trance. Sorry, I'm on it, Eli murmured, scrubbing the counter with unnecessary vigor. It was nearly 4 o'clock. The cafe was in its usual mid-afternoon lull. A few students were hunched over laptops, and an elderly couple sat in the corner whispering. Then, the bell above the door didn't just ring. It chimed with a force that made everyone in the room jump. 3 massive men in charcoal suits stepped inside, their presence instantly sucking the air out of the room. They didn't look like customers, they looked like a storm front. They moved with professional precision, forming a perimeter that effectively cut off the cafe from the outside world. Eli's heart stopped. His throat went dry. He tried to take a step back, but his legs felt like lead. The 3 men stepped aside, clearing a path for the figure that had been standing behind them. It was him. But the Lucian from the night before, the wounded, desperate man, was gone. In his place stood a titan of power. He wore a flawless, midnight blue suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and commanding height. His black hair was perfectly styled, and a large silver ring glinted on his finger. He radiated an aura of absolute authority and lethal intent. His obsidian eyes locked onto Eli's, pinning him to the spot like a moth to a needle. Lucian walked toward the counter, his steps slow, deliberate, and heavy with the weight of a man who owned everything he looked at. The students and the elderly couple scrambled to leave, ushered out silently but firmly by the guards. Soon, it was just the 2 of them in the chilling silence of the cafe. You lied to me, Eli whispered, his voice trembling as Lucian reached the counter. Your name isn't just Lucian. The corner of Lucian's mouth quirked upward, a dangerous, breathtaking ghost of a smile. He reached out, his large, scarred hand covering Eli's small, shaking one on the counter. The heat from his skin was electric, sending a jolt through Eli's entire body. You saved my life, little artist, Lucian said, his voice a dark melody that vibrated in Eli's chest. And in my world, the rules are very simple. When you save a life, that life belongs to you. But more importantly, your life now belongs to me. Eli's eyes widened with a mix of terror and disbelief. I don't want anything from you. I left the money on the table. You can take it and go. Please, just leave me alone. Lucian's gaze darkened, a possessive fire igniting in his eyes. He leaned closer, his scent, expensive cologne and tobacco, overpowering Eli's senses. He slowly brought Eli's hand to his lips, pressing a lingering, heated kiss to his knuckles. Eli's face flushed a deep crimson, his heart racing out of control. It's too late for that, Eli, Lucian whispered, his voice thick with a terrifying promise. I've caught your scent, and Lucian Falco never lets go of what is his. As the silence of the cafe stretched between them, Eli realized that his quiet, watercolor world had been set ablaze. The darkness had claimed him, and as he looked into Lucian's eyes, he realized with a shuddering breath that he was already falling for the very monster he should be running from. End of Part 1. Part 2. The world outside the cafe window seemed to blur into a streak of gray and neon as Eli was ushered into the back of a sleek, armored limousine. He sat as far away from Lucian as the leather seat would allow, his hands tucked between his knees to hide their trembling. Lucian, however, acted as if nothing was out of the ordinary. He was focused on a tablet, barking low, sharp commands into a phone in a language Eli didn't recognize, but the tone alone was enough to make his skin crawl. It was the sound of a man who decided who lived and who died with a single word. "Where are you taking me?" Eli finally found his voice, though it sounded fragile even to his own ears. Lucian didn't look up from his screen immediately. He finished typing a message, locked the device, and then turned his head. The interior of the car was dim, lit only by the passing streetlights, making Lucian's eyes look like two glowing embers in the dark. "You're moving, Eli. Your old life was a liability the moment you touched me in that alley. My enemies saw you. They saw a weakness. And in my world, a weakness is something you either destroy or you cage. I'm not a weakness. I'm just a person," Eli protested, his face flushing with a mix of anger and fear. "I have school, I have my job, I have my paintings. You have nothing but a target on your back now," Lucian interrupted, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. He leaned across the space between them, invading Eli's personal bubble until Eli was pressed against the car door. "The men who shot me are still out there. If they find you, they won't just kill you. They will use you to get to me. They will break every bone in that pretty little body just to hear me growl. Is that the life you want to go back to?" Eli went silent, the reality of the situation sinking in like a lead weight. He looked out the window as they left the familiar, gritty streets of his neighborhood and began ascending the winding roads toward the hills, the place where the city's elite lived in fortresses of glass and steel. They pulled up to a massive estate hidden behind towering stone walls and iron gates. Armed men stood at every corner, their faces stony and eyes alert. As the car door was opened, Lucian stepped out and waited, extending a hand toward Eli. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. Eli hesitated for a moment before placing his hand in Lucian's. The contrast was stark, Eli's pale, slender fingers against Lucian's large, calloused, and scarred palm. Inside, the mansion was a cold, echoing monument to wealth. Marble floors, priceless art, and a suffocating silence that felt heavier than any noise. Lucian led him up a grand staircase to a suite of rooms that was larger than Eli's entire apartment. "This is yours," Lucian said, gesturing to the room. "There are clothes in the wardrobe. A doctor will be here in an hour to check your wrist. One of my men was a bit too rough earlier." "I don't want your clothes or your rooms," Eli snapped, turning to face the MAFIA boss. "I want my life back. Why are you doing this? You could have just given me the money and left me alone." Lucian stepped closer, his presence so overwhelming that Eli had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. Lucian reached out, his thumb tracing the line of Eli's jaw with a gentleness that was more frightening than his anger. "Because when I was lying in that rain, waiting for the dark to take me, I saw a light. I saw you. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt something other than hate. I'm a selfish man, Eli. I don't give up things that make me feel." Eli felt a shiver run down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "You're insane." "I'm a falcon," Lucian corrected softly. "It's practically the same thing." Over the next few days, Eli felt like a ghost in a gilded cage. He was provided with everything he could ever need, high-quality paints, the finest canvases, gourmet food, but he was never allowed to leave the grounds. He was watched by cameras and guarded by men who looked like they were carved out of granite. Lucian was rarely there during the day, but every evening he appeared. Sometimes he would sit in the corner of the room while Eli painted, watching him in total silence for hours. Other times, he would insist on Eli joining him for dinner, where the tension between them was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. One night, a week after his abduction, Eli was startled by the sound of glass shattering downstairs, followed by the rapid-fire pop of suppressed gunfire. His heart leaped into his throat. He ran to the door, but it was locked from the outside. "Lucian!" he screamed, banging on the heavy wood. "Lucian, what's happening?" The sounds of the struggle grew closer. Shouts in the hallway, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. Suddenly, the lock clicked, and the door swung open. Lucian stood there, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt splattered with fresh blood. He was holding a handgun, his eyes wide and wild with a manic sort of protectiveness. "Get down!" Lucian roared as a shadow appeared in the hallway behind him. Lucian spun around, firing 2 shots with lethal precision. Eli dove behind the bed, covering his ears, his mind racing with terror. He heard Lucian grunting as he engaged in hand-to-hand combat with another intruder. The sounds of bone hitting bone and the muffled cries of pain filled the room. It felt like an eternity, but within minutes, silence returned. Eli peeked over the edge of the bed. Lucian was standing by the door, breathing heavily, his knuckles raw and bleeding. He looked down at Eli, his expression softening for a split second before returning to his mask of iron. "Pack a bag," Lucian rasped. "The house has been compromised. We're leaving." "Now, who were they?" Eli asked, his voice shaking. "My past," Lucian replied darkly. He walked over to Eli, grabbing him by the waist and pulling him up. He checked Eli over, his hands roaming over his shoulders and arms to make sure he wasn't hurt. "Are you injured? Did they touch you?" "No, I'm okay," Eli whispered, looking into Lucian's eyes. For the first time, he didn't see just a monster. He saw a man who was terrified of losing the one piece of humanity he had left. They rushed through the back exits of the mansion, heading toward a hidden garage where a rugged SUV was waiting. As they sped away into the night, leaving the burning remains of the estate's security behind, Lucian took Eli's hand and gripped it so tight it hurt. "They think they can take you to get to me," Lucian growled, staring out at the dark road ahead. "They have no idea what I'm willing to do to keep you." Eli looked at their joined hands, then up at the profile of the man who had stolen him from his life. He knew he should be looking for a way to escape, but as the adrenaline began to fade, a dark, confusing heat began to bloom in his chest. He was in the middle of a war, tied to a man who lived by the gun, but in the chaos, Lucian's grip was the only thing that felt solid. "Where are we going?" Eli asked. Lucian turned to him, a predatory glint returning to his eyes. "To my private island. A place where the world can't find us. A place where you will finally understand that you are mine, Eli. Body, soul, and every breath you take." Just as they reached the outskirts of the city, a black van swerved in front of them, forcing Lucian to slam on the brakes. From the shadows of the nearby trees, dozens of red laser dots appeared on the windshield, all centered on Lucian's chest. Lucian's grip on Eli's hand tightened until Eli winced. "Don't look," Lucian whispered, reaching for a grenade in the center console. "Close your eyes and count to 10, Eli. Whatever happens, do not open them." End of Part 2. Part 3. 1. Eli whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the word. He squeezed his eyes shut, plunging himself into a terrifying darkness. 2. The world outside the armored SUV was utterly silent for a fraction of a second, the calm before the absolute devastation. Lucian's grip on Eli's hand released, and Eli felt the sudden shift in the car's weight as the MAFIA boss threw his body across the center console. 3. 4. Boom. The explosion was deafening. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force that punched the air right out of Eli's lungs. The heavy, bulletproof windshield shattered outward in a spiderweb of a million glittering shards. The black van that had cut them off was engulfed in a blinding, roaring fireball that turned the night sky a vicious shade of orange. The shockwave rocked their heavy vehicle, tilting it dangerously onto 2 wheels before it slammed back down onto the asphalt with a bone-jarring crunch. Eli screamed, his hands flying up to cover his head, but he didn't open his eyes. He had promised not to. "Stay down." Lucian roared over the ringing in their ears. The sound of automatic gunfire erupted, tearing through the smoke and flames. Bullets rained against the reinforced steel of their SUV like deadly hail. Eli curled into a tight ball in the footwell, his heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against his ribs. He could hear Lucian moving above him with terrifying speed and precision. The passenger door kicked open. Lucian didn't hesitate. He was a phantom of violence, his own weapon returning fire with calculated, rhythmic bursts. Every shot he fired was followed by a sickening thud or a muffled scream from the shadows outside. "Eli, open your eyes. Give me your hand. Now," Lucian commanded, his voice slicing through the chaos with absolute authority. Eli snapped his eyes open. The scene outside was a nightmare of twisted metal, raging fires, and thick, choking smoke. Lucian was crouched by the open door, his face streaked with soot and a thin line of blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. His obsidian eyes, however, were burning with an unholy, feral light. He looked like the devil himself, rising from the ashes of his enemies. Eli scrambled across the seats, his hands slipping on the leather, and grabbed Lucian's outstretched hand. Lucian yanked him forward, pulling him out of the ruined vehicle and tucking him securely under his arm, shielding Eli's body entirely with his own massive frame. "Run. Don't look back," Lucian growled against Eli's ear. They sprinted into the dense, dark woods lining the road. Branches tore at Eli's clothes and scratched his face, but Lucian's grip around his waist was an iron band, practically carrying him over the uneven terrain. Behind them, the sounds of shouting and secondary explosions echoed into the night, but Lucian didn't stop. He navigated the treacherous forest with the instincts of an apex predator who knew the dark better than anyone. After what felt like hours of agonizing running, the trees broke, revealing a hidden, jagged coastline. The black waves of the ocean crashed violently against the rocks. Hidden in a natural cove, camouflaged under heavy netting, was a sleek, black speedboat. Lucian tossed the netting aside and lifted Eli into the boat as easily as if he weighed nothing. He jumped in after him, rapidly flipping switches on the console. The twin engines roared to life with a deep, menacing purr. Within seconds, they were tearing across the open water, leaving the burning chaos of the city far behind them. The freezing ocean spray whipped against Eli's face, finally snapping him out of his state of shock. He collapsed onto the cushioned seat, pulling his knees to his chest, shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline was leaving his system, replaced by a cold, crushing wave of reality. People had just died, right in front of him. And the man steering the boat, the man whose dark, piercing gaze was constantly checking on him through the darkness, was a mass murderer. Yet, when Eli looked at Lucian, he didn't feel the paralyzing terror he knew he should. Instead, a deeply confusing, sick, twisted sense of safety washed over him. As long as he was with this monster, nothing else in the world could touch him. Lucian locked the steering wheel and moved to the back of the boat. He opened a compartment, pulling out a heavy, fleece-lined blanket. He knelt in front of Eli, wrapping the blanket tightly around the young artist's shivering shoulders. His large, blood-stained hands lingered, gently brushing a wet strand of hair away from Eli's pale forehead. "You did perfectly, little bird," Lucian murmured, his voice softening into a dark velvet tone that sent a shiver down Eli's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "You trusted me. You kept your eyes closed." Who were they?" Eli stammered, his teeth chattering. "The Rossi Syndicate," Lucian answered, his jaw clenching, the muscles feathering with suppressed rage. "Rivals. They found out about you. They thought if they ambushed me while I was distracted, they could take my crown. They thought you were my weakness." Lucian leaned in closer, until the tips of their noses were almost brushing. The scent of gunpowder, sea salt, and expensive cologne wrapped around Eli like a drug. "But they were wrong," Lucian whispered fiercely, his dark eyes tracing the shape of Eli's lips. "You aren't my weakness, Eli. You are my obsession. And an obsession makes a man infinitely more dangerous." Eli couldn't breathe. The air between them was so charged, so thick with dark promises and dangerous desire, that he felt lightheaded. He should push Lucian away. He should scream for help. But the isolation of the dark ocean, the raw power radiating from the man in front of him, and the intoxicating heat of Lucian's proximity kept him paralyzed. "I didn't ask for this," Eli finally whispered, a single tear escaping his amber eyes and tracking down his cheek. "I just wanted to paint. I just wanted a normal life." Lucian reached out, his rough thumb catching the tear before it could fall off Eli's chin. "Normal is a lie they tell ordinary people to keep them docile. You were never meant for ordinary, Eli. The moment you chose to touch a dying mafia boss in a filthy alley, you chose the dark. You chose me." The speedboat sliced through the water for another hour until the faint silhouette of an island appeared on the horizon. As they drew closer, Eli could see that it was a fortress disguised as a paradise. Steep, jagged cliffs surrounded the island, making it impossible to approach unnoticed. At the peak of the highest cliff stood a breathtaking, ultramodern villa made almost entirely of glass and black steel, glowing softly in the pre-dawn light. They docked at a highly secured private pier. Heavily armed guards immediately stepped forward, their heads bowed respectfully as Lucian helped Eli out of the boat. "Prepare the medical wing," Lucian ordered one of the men, his tone back to the icy, commanding bark of a leader. "And secure the perimeter. No one gets on or off this island without my direct authorization. If a single bird flies over this airspace, I want it shot down." "Yes, boss," the guard replied, instantly rushing off. Lucian led Eli up a winding stone path toward the magnificent villa. Inside, the luxury was blinding. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the crashing ocean, while priceless artifacts and sleek, minimalist furniture decorated the vast spaces. But Eli didn't care about the wealth. He was entirely focused on the fact that he was now trapped on an island in the middle of nowhere, with no phone, no contact with the outside world, and under the absolute control of a man who was dangerously fixated on him. Lucian guided him into a massive, spa-like bathroom attached to the master suite. He turned on the golden faucets, letting hot water fill the massive marble tub. Steam began to rise, fogging up the mirrors. "Take off your clothes," Lucian said, his back to Eli as he checked the water temperature. Eli froze, his heart skipping a beat. "What?" Lucian turned slowly. He stripped off his own ruined, blood-soaked suit jacket and tossed it onto the pristine floor. Next went the shoulder holster, the heavy guns clattering against the tiles. Then, he began unbuttoning his torn shirt, revealing a torso covered in old, jagged scars and intricate, dark tattoos that seemed to writhe over his muscles as he moved. "You're covered in my enemy's blood and dirt from the forest," Lucian said calmly, though his eyes were dark and predatory. He stepped toward Eli, backing the younger man up against the smooth marble wall. "Take off your clothes, Eli, or I will tear them off you myself." Eli's breath hitched. He was pinned between the cold marble behind him and the burning heat of Lucian's heavily scarred chest in front of him. He looked up, his amber eyes wide with a mix of defiance and undeniable, terrifying arousal. "You can't just order me around like one of your soldiers," Eli breathed, trying to sound brave, though his voice shook. Lucian smirked, lifting a hand to weave his fingers into Eli's soft, messy hair, gently tilting his head back to expose his throat. "You are absolutely right. I don't order you around like a soldier. A soldier can be replaced." Lucian leaned in, his lips brushing against the sensitive skin just beneath Eli's ear. Eli let out a soft, involuntary gasp, his hands coming up to rest flat against Lucian's bare chest, feeling the heavy, steady thud of the mobster's heart. "You," Lucian murmured against his skin, sending a wave of electric heat straight to Eli's core, "are irreplaceable. You are the only thing in this miserable world that I want. And I am going to wash every trace of the outside world off your skin until the only thing you smell like, the only thing you know, is me." Before Eli could protest, before he could even process the dark declaration of ownership, Lucian's mouth crashed down onto his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It was rough, hungry, and desperate, tasting of smoke, danger, and unyielding power. Eli's mind screamed at him to fight, to push back, but his body betrayed him. His hands curled into the fabric of Lucian's trousers, pulling the larger man closer as the kiss deepened, plunging Eli entirely into the intoxicating abyss of the Mafia boss's dark obsession. But as the passion flared in the steamy bathroom, a sharp, urgent knocking echoed from the bedroom door, shattering the moment. "Boss," a guard's voice called out, laced with sheer panic. "Boss, you need to see this immediately. It's the Rossi family. They didn't just attack the cars. They left a present at the front gates of the estate before it burned down." Lucian tore his lips away from Eli's, his eyes flashing with sudden, violent fury. The romantic tension evaporated, instantly replaced by the terrifying aura of a warlord. "What is it?" Lucian snarled toward the door. It's a severed head, sir," the guard stammered, "and there's a note pinned to its forehead. It has Eli's name on it." End of Part 3. Part 4. The air in the bathroom instantly turned from suffocatingly hot to freezing cold. Lucian's chest heaved, his jaw locking so tight that Eli could hear his teeth grinding together. The intoxicating spell of their kiss was brutally shattered, replaced by the suffocating reality of the Mafia war they were entangled in. Lucian didn't say a word. He simply stepped back, picked up his discarded, blood-stained shirt, and pulled it over his broad shoulders, leaving the buttons undone. He grabbed his shoulder holster, checking the magazines with terrifying mechanical precision. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice devoid of the dark passion from moments ago, replaced by the hollow, metallic ring of a killer. "Lock the door. Do not let anyone in unless you hear my voice." Eli stood shivering in the center of the vast bathroom, the steam clinging to his skin like a heavy shroud. As the heavy bedroom door clicked shut and locked from the outside, a suffocating silence fell over the room. But Eli's heart was hammering too violently to obey. The Rossi syndicate had left a severed head with his name on it. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was a pawn on their bloody chessboard. Quickly grabbing a thick bathrobe from the rack, he wrapped it tightly around himself and hurried into the main bedroom. He pressed his ear against the heavy oak door, listening to the muffled voices in the corridor. "Sent an encrypted image to the mainframe," a guard was saying urgently. "It's Marco, sir, the hitman who failed to kill you in the alley. They executed him for his failure and used him to send a message." "Show me," Lucian growled. Eli couldn't just wait in ignorance. He looked around the room and noticed the security panel near the bed. It was a state-of-the-art smart home system. With trembling fingers, he tapped the screen, navigating through the menus until he found the external security feeds. He clicked on the file the guards were likely viewing. The screen flickered, and Eli let out a choked gasp, clapping a hand over his mouth to stifle his scream. The image was high resolution and horrifically clear. It was the severed head of a man with brutal, lifeless eyes, resting on the ashes of Lucian's burned gates. Nailed directly into his forehead was a blood-soaked piece of parchment. Written in elegant, mocking calligraphy were the words, "You saved the devil, Eli. Now we will make you watch as we tear his empire apart, piece by piece, until we finally come for your pretty little head." The tablet was suddenly ripped from the wall, the screen shattering as it hit the marble floor. Eli spun around, terrified. Lucian had re-entered the room through a concealed side door, his eyes blazing with a fury so intense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on Eli's chest. "I told you to stay in the bathroom," Lucian roared, crossing the distance between them in 2 massive strides. He grabbed Eli by the upper arms, his grip bruising. "This is not a game, Eli. You are not a spectator here. You look at things you shouldn't, you step out of line, and you will get yourself killed." Instead of shrinking away, a sudden, inexplicable wave of defiance washed over Eli. The fear was still there, but it was twisting into something else: adrenaline, survival instinct, and a dark, undeniable bond with the monster holding him. "Then stop treating me like a fragile doll," Eli yelled back, pushing against Lucian's solid chest. "They know my name. They are coming for me just as much as they are coming for you. I didn't ask for this war, but I'm in it now, so stop shutting me out." Lucian froze, his breathing ragged. He stared down at the trembling, fierce boy in his arms. The amber eyes that usually held such innocence were now burning with a desperate, wild fire. The sight hit Lucian harder than a bullet. He let out a low, dangerous growl, his grip shifting from Eli's arms to his waist, pulling him flush against his hard body. "You want to be part of my world?" Lucian whispered, his voice dark, velvet, and laced with absolute madness. "You want to see the monster you saved? Fine." Lucian dragged Eli out of the suite, their footsteps echoing down the long, glass-walled corridors of the villa. They descended a hidden staircase that spiraled deep into the rocky foundation of the island. The air grew colder, smelling of damp earth and iron. They arrived in a massive, subterranean command center. Rows of glowing monitors covered the walls, displaying satellite feeds, financial markets, and global communication networks. Dozens of heavily armed men and tech experts were working frantically. The moment Lucian entered, the room fell dead silent. "Status," Lucian barked, not letting go of Eli's hand. He pulled Eli right to the center of the room, forcing him to stand by his side, a clear, undeniable statement to every man in his syndicate. Eli was his. A scarred man with an eye patch stepped forward, bowing his head slightly. "Boss, the Rossi family is making a coordinated push. They've hit 3 of our shipping ports in the city and bribed 2 of our local judges. They are trying to cut off our supply lines and leave us exposed." The man briefly glanced at Eli, his visible eye narrowing with curiosity, but he quickly looked back at Lucian. "And sir, we intercepted an encrypted radio transmission originating from inside this island." The temperature in the room seemed to drop below freezing. Lucian's grip on Eli's hand tightened to the point of pain. "A mole," Lucian said, the words slipping from his lips like a curse. "Someone on my island gave them our coordinates. Someone on this island told them Eli's name. We are tracing the signal now, boss." It was brief, but it pinged from the eastern cliffside, near the servant quarters, the tech expert reported, his fingers flying across his keyboard. Lucian turned to the scarred man. "Lock down the island. No one moves. No one communicates. Gather every guard, every servant, every staff member in the main courtyard. If anyone resists, shoot them in the legs and drag them there." As the men scrambled to execute the brutal orders, Lucian turned his terrifying gaze to Eli. "You wanted to see the truth of my world, Eli. This is it. Trust is an illusion, and betrayal is paid for in blood." He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the line of Eli's pale cheek, a sickening contrast to the violence he had just ordered. "Someone here wants you dead, and I am going to find them, and I am going to make them scream until their vocal cords tear." An hour later, the courtyard of the villa was a scene of absolute terror. Over 50 people, guards, maids, chefs, were lined up on their knees on the cold stone, shivering in the ocean wind. Floodlights illuminated the area, casting long, nightmarish shadows. Lucian stood before them, a loaded weapon in his hand. He had forced Eli to stand on the balcony above, flanked by two loyal guards, making him watch. Eli gripped the marble railing, feeling sick to his stomach. He was watching a king judge's court, knowing that death was imminent. Lucian paced slowly in front of the kneeling staff, his boots clicking rhythmically against the stone. For 15 years, I have provided for you. I have protected your families. And in return, I demanded only one thing: absolute loyalty. Lucian's voice echoed through the night, calm but dripping with lethal intent. Tonight, someone broke that vow. Someone sold the life of the boy upstairs to the Rossi dogs. He stopped in front of a young guard who was trembling uncontrollably. Lucian grabbed the man by the hair, forcing his head back. "Was it you, Carlo?" Lucian whispered, pressing the barrel of the gun against the man's temple. "Did Rossi offer you money? Power? And no, boss. I swear on my mother's life, I know nothing." Carlo sobbed, tears streaming down his face. Lucian stared into the man's eyes for a long, agonizing moment. Then he released him, stepping away. He walked down the line, interrogating, intimidating, searching for the crack in their armor. Eli watched, breathless, terrified of what Lucian was capable of, yet unable to tear his eyes away from the raw, magnetic power the man commanded. Suddenly, a loud, static-filled screech erupted from the island's PA system, cutting through the tension. The floodlights flickered and died, plunging the courtyard into absolute, pitch-black darkness. Shouts of confusion erupted from the guards. "Protect the boss," someone yelled. Up on the balcony, Eli felt a cold, gloved hand clamp roughly over his mouth from behind. A strong arm wrapped around his chest, lifting him off his feet. He struggled wildly, kicking and thrashing, but the attacker was too strong. A needle pierced the side of his neck, and an icy fire shot through his veins. As the world began to spin and fade into darkness, the last thing Eli heard was the agonizing, enraged roar of Lucian tearing through the night below. ELI. End of Part 4. Part 5. The return to consciousness was not a gentle awakening, but a brutal, suffocating crawl through layers of thick, toxic darkness. Eli's head throbbed with a sickening rhythm, the lingering effects of the injected sedative making his blood feel like lead. The air he drew into his burning lungs was heavy, tasting of rust, damp concrete, and decay. He forced his heavy eyelids open, blinking against the harsh, unforgiving glare of a single, swinging incandescent bulb above him. His vision swam before finally focusing on the grim reality of his surroundings. He was in an abandoned warehouse, the walls stained with moisture and peeling paint. His arms were pulled tightly behind his back, his wrists bound to the cold metal frame of a heavy chair with thick zip ties that bit painfully into his skin. His ankles were secured to the legs of the chair. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at his throat, but before he could let out a desperate cry, the heavy metal door across the room groaned open. The rhythmic click of expensive leather shoes against the concrete floor echoed through the cavernous space. A man walked into the dim circle of light, flanked by two armed guards. He was tall, dressed in a sharp maroon suit, with slicked-back blonde hair and a face that was handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way. This was not the raw, terrifying majesty of Lucian Falcone. This was a man whose power felt slimy, like a snake waiting in the grass. "Ah, the sleeping beauty finally opens his eyes," the man purred, his voice dripping with a mocking, sickeningly sweet tone. He stepped closer, leaning down until his face was inches from Eli's. He smelled of cloying cologne and old cigarettes. "I am Lorenzo Rossi. I believe my family and your protector have a bit of a disagreement. And you, my pretty little bird, are the negotiation chip." Lorenzo reached out, tracing a cold finger down Eli's pale cheek. Eli flinched violently, turning his head away in sheer disgust. Lorenzo chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Fiery. I like that. I can see why the great, heartless Lucian Falcone suddenly lost his damn mind. For 15 years, the man was an impenetrable fortress. No friends, no lovers, no weaknesses. Just a machine built for slaughter. And then he risks his entire empire, burns down his own estate, and executes his own men for a frail, insignificant art student he picked up in an alley." Lorenzo stood up straight, adjusting his cuffs with exaggerated elegance. "It's pathetic, really, but highly advantageous for me." Eli's heart hammered against his ribs, but as he stared into Lorenzo's arrogant eyes, a strange, unexpected sensation washed over him. The paralyzing terror that had dominated him since the night in the alley was gone. In its place was a cold, clarifying anger. He remembered the raw, agonizing roar of Lucian's voice as he was dragged into the darkness. He remembered the heavy, steady beat of Lucian's heart against his palms. Lucian had warned him. Lucian had claimed him. And as Eli sat bound in the enemy's lair, he realized that he didn't just belong to the devil. A piece of the devil now belonged to him. "You're making a mistake," Eli whispered, his voice raspy from the drugs but startlingly steady. "You think you're using me to trap him. But all you've done is sign your own death warrant. You haven't captured his weakness, Lorenzo. You've just unleashed a monster you cannot control." Lorenzo's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine unease crossing his features before he masked it with a loud, theatrical laugh. Brave words for a boy tied to a chair. "We'll see how brave you are when I start sending him pieces of you." Lorenzo snapped his fingers, and one of the guards stepped forward with a heavy, professional-grade video camera on a tripod, setting it up directly in front of Eli. Another guard rolled in a metal cart covered with a white cloth. When he pulled the cloth away, the dull glint of surgical instruments, pliers, and knives was exposed under the harsh light. Eli's breath hitched, his newfound bravery warring with raw, human instinct. "The mole on the island gave us access to Lucian's private encrypted frequency before we cut his throat," Lorenzo explained casually, checking his watch. "In exactly 2 minutes, we are going to establish a live video feed directly to Falcone's command center. I am going to demand total surrender of his ports, his territories, and his weapons. And if he hesitates for even a single second..." Lorenzo picked up a scalpel, the blade catching the light as he pressed the flat side against Eli's throat. "I will make him watch as I carve his pretty little bird into an unrecognizable mess." Miles away, the Falcone Island was a vision of absolute apocalypse. The subterranean command center was bathed in the red glow of emergency lights. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the frantic, terrifying energy of a warlord pushed beyond the brink of sanity. Lucian stood at the center of the room, looking like a god of war who had descended to exact vengeance upon the earth. His shirt was soaked in the blood of the traitor he had torn apart with his bare hands just moments before. His knuckles were destroyed, his eyes pitch black and devoid of any human emotion. He was a weapon, stripped of its safety. "Boss," his second-in-command whispered, his voice trembling as he stared at the main monitor. "Incoming transmission. It's an encrypted video feed. From the Rossi Syndicate." The entire room froze. Men who had killed without remorse held their breath. "Put it on screen," Lucian commanded, his voice so quiet, so deadly, that it sent shivers down the spines of his most hardened killers. The massive screen flickered to life. The image of the dark, damp warehouse appeared, and there, bound to the chair, pale and exhausted but miraculously alive, was Eli. The moment Lucian saw the sharp edge of the scalpel resting against Eli's delicate throat, the monitors around the room cracked from the sheer force of the mob boss, slamming his fist onto the control console. His breathing was heavy, ragged, sounding like a beast chained to a wall. Lorenzo's smug face appeared in the frame, standing behind Eli. "Good evening, Lucian." Lorenzo smirked into the camera. "I hope you enjoy the view. Your little pet is quite resilient, but I'm afraid my patience is not. Here are my terms. You will transfer all deeds to the eastern docks to my family. You will recall your soldiers from the city center, and you will step down as the head of the syndicate. If you refuse, or if you try to trace this call, the first thing I cut off is his ear." Lucian didn't blink. He didn't shout. He just stared at the screen, his eyes locking directly onto Eli's. In that terrifying silence, a silent conversation passed between them. Eli saw the apocalyptic fury in Lucian's eyes, but beneath it, he saw a desperate, agonizing love that grounded him. Eli didn't cry. He held Lucian's gaze and gave a microscopic nod. He trusted him. "Lorenzo," Lucian finally spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing through the warehouse where Eli was held. It wasn't the voice of a defeated man. It was the calm, resonant decree of an executioner. "You think you are a businessman making a trade. You don't understand what you've done. You touched what is mine. You breathed the same air as him." Lucian leaned closer to the camera, his face filling the screen in the warehouse, looking directly at the Rossi air. "I don't negotiate with dead men. Look out the window, Lorenzo." Lorenzo frowned, his smug expression cracking into confusion. "What are you talking about? We scrambled the signal. You can't possibly." He was cut off by a sound that shook the very foundation of the earth. A deafening, catastrophic roar tore through the night sky. The reinforced concrete walls of the warehouse vibrated so violently that dust rained down from the ceiling. Lorenzo spun around, rushing toward the high, grimy windows at the far end of the room. He wiped away the dirt and looked out into the darkness. His jaw dropped, all color draining from his face. The sky outside was not dark. It was illuminated by the searchlights of 4 military-grade attack helicopters hovering like angels of death around the perimeter. Below them, Dozens of armored tactical vehicles had already smashed through the compound's outer gates. How? Lorenzo whispered, his voice cracking in absolute terror. How did you find us in 20 minutes? Lucian's dark, sadistic chuckle echoed through the speakers, freezing the blood in the veins of every Rossi guard in the room. You thought you kidnapped a helpless boy. Lucian's voice vibrated with a terrifying promise of violence. But before we left the island, my medical team treated the cuts on his wrists. They slipped a micro-GPS tracker under his skin. I knew exactly where you were the second you dragged him into that rat hole. I didn't come to negotiate, Lorenzo. I came to eradicate your entire bloodline from the face of the earth. The broadcast abruptly cut off to black. A second later, the heavy steel doors of the warehouse were blown completely off their hinges by a massive explosive charge. The shockwave threw Lorenzo and his guards to the floor. Through the thick, swirling smoke and the fiery debris, a silhouette emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, and clutching twin suppressed submachine guns, Lucian Falcone walked into the warehouse, surrounded by an army of his most elite, heavily armed enforcers. Gunfire erupted instantly, turning the warehouse into a blinding, deafening slaughterhouse. Eli squeezed his eyes shut, turning his head away as the Rossi guards were torn apart by a hail of bullets in a matter of seconds. Lorenzo crawled backward, screaming in terror, but a single, precise shot from Lucian shattered his kneecap, pinning him to the floor in a pool of his own blood. The chaos ended as abruptly as it began, leaving behind a suffocating silence broken only by Lorenzo's agonizing groans and the heavy, deliberate footsteps of the Mafia king. Lucian dropped his weapons to the floor. He didn't even look at Lorenzo as he walked past him. He moved straight toward the chair, dropping to his knees on the bloody concrete right in front of Eli. His massive, shaking hands reached out, instantly snapping the thick zip ties binding Eli's wrists and ankles as if they were made of string. Freed from his restraints, Eli practically collapsed forward. He didn't hit the floor. He crashed into Lucian's solid, heat-radiating chest. Lucian's arms wrapped around him, pulling the boy into his lap with a desperate, crushing grip. He buried his face into the crook of Eli's neck, inhaling his scent like a drowning man breaking the surface of the water. "You're safe," Lucian breathed, his voice thick and rough, kissing Eli's shoulder, his neck, his jawline. "I've got you. I've got you, my beautiful boy. No one will ever touch you again." Eli closed his eyes, his hands coming up to bury themselves in Lucian's dark hair, clinging to the Mafia boss amidst the wreckage and the blood. The monster had burned the world to the ground just to find him, and as Eli held him tight, he realized with absolute certainty that he never wanted to leave the fire. End of Part 5. Part 6. The air in the ruined warehouse was thick with the suffocating scent of gunpowder, charred concrete, and copper. For a long, suspended moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist for Eli. There was only the crushing, desperate strength of Lucian's arms around him, the erratic, thundering beat of the mob boss's heart against his chest, and the rough fabric of his blood-stained shirt. Eli buried his face deeper into the crook of Lucian's neck, his fingers curling tightly into the dark fabric of his jacket. He was surrounded by a massacre, bathed in the red emergency lights of the breached compound, yet he had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly invincible. "Lucian," Eli whispered, his voice trembling as the sheer scale of the violence finally registered in his exhausted mind. He pulled back just enough to look into Lucian's eyes. The obsidian depths that had just orchestrated the slaughter of dozens of men were now entirely focused on him, filled with an agonizing mixture of relief and lingering, feral terror. Lucian lifted a gloved hand, gently cupping Eli's dirt-streaked face. His thumb brushed over a small scratch on Eli's cheekbone, his jaw clenching at the sight of the minor injury. "Did he hurt you?" Lucian's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through Eli's entire body. "Did Lorenzo touch you, Eli? Tell me everything. If he laid a single finger on you, shooting him was too merciful." Eli shook his head quickly, his hands moving to grip Lucian's wrists. No, he just talked. He wanted to use me to break you. But you came. You found me. I will always find you," Lucian swore, leaning down to press a fierce, lingering kiss against Eli's forehead. It was a vow sealed in blood and smoke. "If they took you to the deepest pits of hell, I would slaughter the devil himself to get you back." A pathetic, wet groan broke the intimacy of the moment. A few yards away, Lorenzo Rossi was dragging himself across the bloody concrete, leaving a dark smear behind him. His kneecap was completely shattered, his once immaculate maroon suit torn and soaked in his own blood. Lucian's expression instantly morphed from desperate devotion to absolute, glacial cruelty. He gently stood up, pulling Eli to his feet and positioning the younger man slightly behind him, shielding him from the gruesome sight. But Eli didn't look away. He watched as the monster he had saved in the alley took slow, deliberate steps toward his fallen enemy. Falcone. Lorenzo spat, coughing up blood as he rolled onto his back, staring up at the towering silhouette of the Mafia king. You're a dead man. You think the High Commission will let this slide? You wiped out a founding family without a tribunal. They will strip you of your title. They will burn your empire. Lucian stood over Lorenzo, his face an impenetrable mask of cold fury. He slowly unholstered a heavy, silver-plated pistol from his hip. The Commission only has power because I allow them to exist, Lorenzo. They care about money and order. They will look at the ashes of your family, they will look at the guns I have pointed at their heads, and they will accept the New World Order. Because they are businessmen. Lucian racked the slide of his gun, the metallic click echoing loudly in the silent warehouse. But I am not a businessman anymore. I am a man protecting his own. You crossed a line the moment you learned Eli's name. He's just a boy. Lorenzo screamed, a hysterical edge to his voice as he stared down the barrel of the gun. You're throwing away the entire underworld for a pathetic street rat. He is my soul, Lucian replied softly, his voice echoing with absolute, terrifying sincerity. And you tried to cut it out. Without another word, Lucian pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening. Lorenzo's head snapped back against the concrete, and the warehouse fell completely, utterly silent. Eli flinched at the noise, his breath hitching, but he didn't scream. He didn't run. He just stared at the man who had burned the world down for him. Lucian slowly turned around, dropping the gun to his side. He looked at Eli, his dark eyes searching the younger man's face for any sign of fear, disgust, or rejection. He had just executed a man in cold blood, right in front of him. But Eli simply stepped forward, navigating around the debris, and placed his small, pale hand over Lucian's massive, blood-stained one. Let's go home, Eli whispered. The flight back to the island fortress was a blur. They sat in the back of the heavily armored tactical helicopter, the rhythmic thumping of the rotors vibrating in their bones. Lucian hadn't let go of Eli since they left the warehouse. He had pulled Eli onto his lap, wrapping a thick thermal blanket around his trembling frame. The adrenaline was finally leaving Eli's system, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a dull, throbbing ache in his wrists where the zip ties had dug into his skin. Lucian held him tightly against his chest, his chin resting on top of Eli's head, his arms forming an impenetrable cage of muscle and heat. By the time the helicopter touched down on the island's illuminated helipad, the sky was beginning to lighten, painting the horizon in bruised shades of purple and gray. A team of medics was waiting on the tarmac, rushing forward with a stretcher, but Lucian waved them off with a vicious snarl. "Get out of my way," he ordered, sweeping Eli into his arms and carrying him down the ramp himself. He marched past his stunned guards, striding purposefully through the massive glass doors of the villa and heading straight for his private chambers. He bypassed the medical wing entirely, kicking the door to the master suite open and carrying Eli into the massive, spa-like bathroom. He set Eli down gently on the edge of the marble counter. The harsh fluorescent lights of the bathroom highlighted how exhausted and battered they both looked. Lucian grabbed a high-grade first aid kit from the cabinet. His hands, which had just dealt absolute death, were shockingly gentle as he took Eli's raw, bruised wrists. He cleaned the cuts with antiseptic, his jaw tight as Eli let out a soft hiss of pain. "I'm sorry," Lucian murmured, his voice cracking slightly. The terrifying Mafia boss looked suddenly, painfully vulnerable. "I'm so sorry, Eli. I promised to protect you, and I let them take you from under my own roof. I failed you." Eli looked down at the dark, powerful man carefully wrapping white gauze around his slender wrists. He reached out with his free hand, his fingers tangling in the soft, dark hair at the nape of Lucian's neck, forcing the older man to look up. "You didn't fail me," Eli said, his voice surprisingly firm. "You tore an entire syndicate apart in less than an hour to find me. You saved my life, Lucian." Again, Lucian closed his eyes, leaning his face into Eli's palm, letting out a ragged breath. "When the feed cut on, when I saw that blade against your throat." Lucian's voice shook, a terrifying admission of weakness from a man who ruled by fear. "I felt my heart stop. I felt the world end, Eli. If he had killed you, I wouldn't have just killed Lorenzo. I would have slaughtered this entire city. I would have drowned it in blood until there was nothing left but dust." Eli felt a shiver run down his spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was the overwhelming, intoxicating realization of how deeply he was loved by this dark, dangerous creature. He slid off the counter, standing right between Lucian's parted knees. He wrapped his arms around Lucian's broad shoulders, pressing his chest against the mobster's. Lucian instantly reacted, his heavy arms wrapping around Eli's waist, burying his face against Eli's chest, listening to the steady, rhythmic beating of his heart. Proof that he was alive, proof that he was still here. "I'm not going anywhere," Eli whispered into the quiet room, his fingers gently stroking Lucian's back. "I stopped running the moment I got on that boat with you. You told me my old life was gone. You were right. But I don't want it back anymore. I want this. I want you." Lucian's head snapped up, his obsidian eyes widening in disbelief. He searched Eli's amber eyes, looking for any trace of coercion, any sign of Stockholm Syndrome or fear. But all he found was a fiery, absolute determination. With a low, desperate groan, Lucian surged upward, crushing his lips against Eli's. It was a kiss born of pure salvation, a chaotic collision of relief, possession, and a dark, unbreakable devotion. Eli kissed him back with equal fervor, his hands gripping Lucian's shirt, anchoring himself to the hurricane. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry and frantic, their bodies pressing together as if trying to merge into a single entity to ensure they could never be separated again. But the sanctuary of their embrace was violently interrupted. A loud, frantic pounding echoed against the bedroom door, followed by the panicked voice of Marcus, Lucian's second-in-command. Boss, you need to come to the command center immediately. It's a code red." Lucian tore his lips away from Eli's, his chest heaving, his eyes instantly flashing with lethal irritation. "I gave orders that we are not to be disturbed," he roared back. "Sir, you don't understand." Marcus yelled through the thick oak door, his voice laced with genuine, unadulterated panic. "The High Commission, they didn't wait for a tribunal. They've declared war. Boss, there are 3 unregistered military destroyers breaking through the fog off the western coast. They aren't trying to negotiate. They're positioning their artillery. They're going to level the entire island." End of Part 6. Part 7. The declaration of war hung in the air like the blade of a guillotine. The fragile, beautiful sanctuary of the bathroom was instantly shattered, replaced by the terrifying reality of their world. Lucian's entire demeanor shifted in a fraction of a second. The vulnerable, desperate lover vanished, and the ruthless, cold-blooded king of the underworld returned. He stepped away from Eli, his jaw locking into a hard, unforgiving line. Without a word, he grabbed a fresh shirt from the closet, threw it on, and began strapping his tactical holsters back over his broad shoulders. He grabbed 2 heavy SIG sour pistols, racking the slides with mechanical precision. "Put your shoes on." "Now," Lucian ordered, his voice devoid of panic but vibrating with an intense, lethal urgency. Eli didn't hesitate. The absolute authority in Lucian's voice left no room for questions. He quickly pulled on his sneakers, his hands still shaking slightly, but his mind sharpening. They rushed out of the master suite, the heavy oak doors flying open as Lucian led the way, his hand firmly gripping Eli's arm. The hallways of the villa were in absolute chaos. Sirens wailed, casting a pulsing, apocalyptic red light over the priceless art and marble floors. Guards were sprinting in every direction, carrying heavy weapons and shouting orders. When they reached the subterranean command center, the atmosphere was suffocating. The massive screens that usually displayed financial markets and city maps were now entirely focused on satellite imagery of the dark ocean. Marcus stood at the central console, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "Boss," Marcus said, his voice tight with dread. "It's the High Commission's Black Fleet. 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. They are operating completely off the grid, no transponders, no official flags. They've bypassed the outer sonar buoys and are currently 3 nautical miles off the western cliffs. Their heavy artillery guns are already tracking our coordinates." Lucian stared at the screens, his eyes narrowing into deadly slits. The High Commission was the ruling council of the global underworld, a shadowy group of billionaires and warlords who maintained order. Lucian was one of them, but by wiping out the Rossi family without a sanctioned tribunal, he had broken their most sacred law. And now, they were coming to erase him from the map. "They don't want a war," Lucian murmured, his voice dark and calculating. "They want an execution. They know my soldiers can hold this island against any infantry assault, so they aren't going to send men. They are going to bomb us into the Stone Age." He turned to Marcus, his eyes blazing. "Initiate the Tartarus Protocol. Total evacuation. Every man drops what they are doing and heads to the underground harbor immediately." Marcus's eyes widened in shock. "Boss, the Tartarus Protocol? That means abandoning the fortress. We have billions of dollars of servers, gold bullion, and weapons here. If we leave, they will reduce your empire's heart to rubble." Lucian didn't even blink. He pulled Eli closer to his side, his large hand resting protectively on the nape of Eli's neck. "Let them burn it," Lucian growled. "Stone and metal can be rebuilt. Money can be earned back. But if those cannons fire while we are still in this compound, we all die. Move." Before Marcus could relay the order, a deafening, catastrophic roar tore through the night. The sound of naval artillery firing was like the sky itself tearing open. Seconds later, the first volley of high-explosive shells slammed into the island's eastern ridge. The impact was apocalyptic. The entire subterranean command center violently shook, throwing several technicians to the floor. Dust and debris rained down from the reinforced ceiling. The lights flickered and died, leaving only the ominous red glow of the emergency backups. Above them, Eli could hear the sickening sound of the beautiful glass and steel villa being torn to shreds. "Go! Go! Go!" Lucian roared over the alarms, grabbing Eli's waist and physically lifting him over a fallen console. They ran toward the heavy steel blast doors at the back of the command center. The Tartarus Protocol was Lucian's absolute last resort, a heavily armored, nuclear-powered stealth submarine hidden in a deep underwater cavern beneath the island, designed to survive a direct nuclear strike and slip away undetected. The tunnels leading down to the cavern were dark, damp, and vibrating violently with every subsequent artillery strike on the surface. The sound was deafening, a relentless, concussive pounding that made Eli's teeth rattle. He was running blindly, relying entirely on Lucian's iron grip to keep him upright. Suddenly, a massive shell struck the earth directly above their section of the tunnel. The reinforced concrete ceiling cracked with a sickening groan, and huge chunks of rock began to collapse. "Look out!" Eli screamed, using all his strength to shove Lucian forward, just as a massive boulder smashed into the ground where the Mafia boss had been standing a fraction of a second before. Lucian stumbled, spinning around to catch Eli, pulling him flush against his chest as a cloud of choking dust washed over them. Lucian coughed, his dark eyes wide with shock as he looked down at the panting, terrified boy in his arms. Eli had just risked his own life to save him. "Again. I told you," Eli rasped, coughing through the dust, his amber eyes burning with fierce determination. "I'm not going anywhere without you." A dark, feral smile cracked across Lucian's face. He didn't say a word. He just kissed Eli hard, a brutal, desperate clash of teeth and lips amidst the falling debris, before grabbing his hand and dragging him deeper into the descent. They finally burst through a set of heavy blast doors, stepping onto a massive steel platform suspended over a pitch-black underground lake. Docked in the water was a terrifying marvel of engineering, a sleek, matte-black submarine at least 300 feet long, humming with silent, immense power. Dozens of Lucian's surviving men were already scrambling across the gangways, loading essential drives and weapons. Marcus was standing by the main hatch, shouting orders. "Boss, the reactor is hot. We are ready to dive." Marcus yelled over the echoing booms of the artillery above. Lucian practically threw Eli down the steel gangway, shielding the younger man's body with his own as another explosion shook the cavern. Chunks of the cavern's ceiling began to fall into the dark water, creating massive, violent waves. "Get in," Lucian ordered, shoving Eli through the heavy steel hatch of the submarine. Eli tumbled into the brightly lit, claustrophobic interior, immediately scrambling back to his feet to look up at the hatch. Lucian was standing on the exterior deck, firing his weapons into the dark cavern tunnels. "Lucian, what are you doing? Come down," Eli screamed, raw panic gripping his throat. Through the tunnels they had just escaped from, the shadows were moving. It wasn't just an artillery strike. The Commission had sent an elite hit squad to infiltrate the tunnels during the bombardment to ensure Lucian didn't escape. Heavily armed mercenaries in black tactical gear were swarming the cavern ledges, firing down at the submarine. Bullets sparked violently against the sub's armor. Lucian stood his ground, a titan of death, his dual pistols unleashing a relentless hail of suppressing fire, dropping mercenary after mercenary to protect his men as they boarded. "Marcus, seal the hatch," Lucian roared, not taking his eyes off the enemy. "No, Lucian, please," Eli cried out, trying to climb back up the ladder, but Marcus grabbed him around the waist, pulling him back. "He'll be right behind us, kid, but I have to secure this lock or we all drown." Marcus grunted, hitting the emergency seal button. The heavy steel hatch began to slide shut. Eli watched in absolute horror as Lucian took a bullet to his left shoulder. The Mafia boss flinched, blood spraying into the air, but he didn't stop firing. Just as the hatch was inches from closing, Lucian dropped his empty guns, dived toward the opening, and slid through the shrinking gap. The hatch locked shut with a definitive, Heavy clank just as a barrage of bullets rained against the exterior metal. Lucian hit the steel deck hard, groaning as he clutched his bleeding shoulder. Eli instantly dropped to his knees beside him, his hands hovering over the wound, his heart hammering in his throat. "You're hit. Oh my God, you're hit." Eli panicked, tears finally spilling over his lashes. Lucian let out a breathless chuckle, reaching up with his good arm to cup Eli's face, smearing a mixture of dust and blood across his pale cheek. "It went clean through, little bird." "I'm fine," Lucian rasped, his eyes shining with that dark, possessive fire. "Dive. Dive now," he shouted to the control room. The floor tilted sharply beneath them as the massive submarine rapidly descended into the crushing depths of the ocean. Above them, they could hear the muffled, distant booms of their island fortress being completely annihilated by the Black Fleet. They had survived. They had escaped the impossible. But as Eli helped Lucian sit up, wrapping a makeshift tourniquet around his bleeding shoulder, the submarine's interior lights suddenly flickered and turned a blaring, emergency crimson. A terrifying, automated voice echoed through the metal corridors. "Warning. Unauthorized biometric signature detected in Sector 4. Warning. Internal sabotage protocol initiated. Main engines offline." Lucian's blood went cold. He looked at Marcus, who was staring at the control panels in sheer horror. They weren't safe. The High Commission hadn't just sent mercenaries and warships. They had planted someone on the inside of the Tartarus Protocol. And now, they were trapped in a metal coffin at the bottom of the ocean, sinking into the abyss with a killer among them. End of Part 7. Part 8. The metallic groan of the submarine's titanium hull echoed through the claustrophobic corridors like the dying breath of a massive steel leviathan. The blaring crimson emergency lights painted everything in the color of fresh blood. Warning. Depth 1,200 feet. Approaching crush depth in 4 minutes. The automated voice was maddeningly calm as the floor tilted further, gravity pulling them down into the lightless, freezing abyss. Lucian didn't hesitate. Ignoring the fresh bullet wound in his shoulder, he pushed himself off the steel deck, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated murder. He grabbed a loaded tactical shotgun from the armory rack next to the hatch. "Marcus, take the helm. Reroute auxiliary power to the ballast tanks. Try to slow our descent," Lucian ordered, his voice echoing with the absolute authority of a man who refused to die in the dark. He turned his terrifying, obsidian eyes to Eli. "Stay here. Lock the bulkhead door behind me." But Eli, his hands still stained with Lucian's blood from the makeshift tourniquet, stepped forward and grabbed the back of Lucian's tactical vest. "No," Eli said, his voice completely devoid of the trembling fear that had defined his old life. He picked up one of the heavy, discarded SIG Sauer pistols from the floor, his grip surprisingly steady. "Someone on this ship tried to hand me over to the Rossi family, and now they are trying to drown us. I am not hiding in a corner while you fight my battles." Lucian stared at the young artist. The boy who had been painting watercolors in a quiet cafe a few days ago was now holding a lethal weapon, his amber eyes burning with a dark, beautiful fire that mirrored Lucian's own soul. A fierce, predatory pride swelled in Lucian's chest. He didn't argue. He just nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that Eli was no longer a civilian. He was his equal. They moved swiftly through the narrow, flashing corridors toward Sector 4. The deeper they went into the engineering decks, the louder the terrifying sounds of the hull buckling under the immense ocean pressure became. Warning. Depth 1,800 feet. Structural integrity compromised. Water was already beginning to spray through tiny fissures in the ceiling pipes, slicking the metal grates beneath their boots. When they reached the heavy blast doors of Sector 4, Lucian didn't bother using the keypad. He raised the shotgun and blew the electronic lock to pieces, kicking the heavy door open. Inside the massive, humming reactor room, a single man was standing over the main propulsion console, his hands flying across the keyboard to lock out the system. It was Silas, the tech expert who had discovered the mole back on the island. He spun around, pulling a sidearm and aiming it directly at Lucian. "Drop the shotgun, boss," Silas yelled, panic and adrenaline making his voice crack. In his other hand, he held a dead man's switch connected to a block of C4 wired directly onto the main reactor coolant line. "I said drop it. You shoot me," my hand relaxes, "and this sub turns into a radioactive fireball before the water even touches us." Lucian's eyes narrowed into lethal slits. He slowly lowered the barrel of the shotgun, his mind calculating every angle, every probability. "The commission got to you," Lucian growled, his voice a low, vibrating threat that cut through the alarms. "They promised you a seat at the table. They promised you my empire. But they lied to you, Silas. You're trapped in a sinking coffin with a dead man walking. Silas let out a hysterical laugh, sweat pouring down his face. I had no choice. You lost your damn mind, Lucian. You broke the oldest laws of our world for a boy. The commission gave me an ultimatum. Sink the Tartarus, and they elevate my family. Fail, and they slaughter my children. I'm sorry, boss. But your reign is over. Silas raised his gun, aiming it squarely at the center of Lucian's chest. Because of his wounded shoulder, Lucian's reaction time was a fraction of a second too slow. But Silas had made a fatal miscalculation. He had completely ignored the boy standing in the shadows just behind the Mafia king. Eli didn't think. He just acted on pure, feral instinct to protect the man he loved. With a fierce cry, Eli stepped out from behind Lucian, raised the heavy pistol, and fired. The recoil sent a shockwave up Eli's arm, but his aim was true at that close range. The bullet tore through Silas's right shoulder, shattering his collarbone. Silas screamed, dropping his gun, but his left hand instinctively clenched around the dead man's switch in sheer agony. Before Silas could recover, Lucian closed the distance like a shadow of death. He slammed his uninjured shoulder into Silas, pinning him violently against the steel bulkhead. With brutal precision, Lucian grabbed the tech's left hand, his massive fingers locking around Silas's fist, ensuring the dead man's switch remained tightly depressed. You made a mistake, Silas, Lucian whispered directly into the traitor's ear, his voice freezing the air in the room. You thought my obsession was my weakness. It is my greatest weapon. With a sickening crunch, Lucian used his other hand to snap Silas's neck. The traitor's eyes rolled back, and his body went limp, but Lucian kept his iron grip on the dead man's switch. Eli, the console. Lucian barked, his muscles straining as he held the dead weight of the traitor. There is a manual override lever under the main keyboard. Pull it. Eli scrambled to the console, his hands shaking violently from the adrenaline and the fact that he had just shot a man. He dropped to his knees, his hands frantically searching the underside of the complex panel. The sub groaned terrifyingly loud. Warning. Depth 2,400 feet. Crush depth imminent in 30 seconds. I can't find it. Eli cried out, panic finally breaking his composure as icy water sprayed onto his back from a failing pipe overhead. Left side painted yellow. Break the glass casing. Lucian roared. Eli found the casing. He didn't look for a tool. He just smashed his elbow into the glass, ignoring the sharp pain as it shattered. He grabbed the heavy yellow lever and yanked it down with all his body weight. The console sparked, the red screen suddenly flashing back to a brilliant, life-saving green. The main engines ignited with a deafening, thunderous roar that vibrated deep in their bones. Marcus's voice instantly crackled over the intercom. Engines online. Full power to the dive planes. Pulling us up. The extreme G-force of the massive submarine violently changing its trajectory threw Eli backward onto the wet deck. Lucian held on to the detonator with one hand, bracing himself against the bulkhead with the other. The terrifying groans of the hull began to subside as they rapidly ascended away from the crushing darkness, leveling out at a safe cruising depth. The blaring alarms finally silenced, replaced by the deep, steady hum of the nuclear reactor. They had survived. Lucian carefully disconnected the C4 wiring from the console, rendering the detonator useless. He tossed it aside, letting Silas's body slide to the floor. Then he turned to Eli. The young artist was sitting on the wet steel grates, breathing heavily, his hands covered in glass cuts and gunpowder residue. He looked exhausted, shattered, and utterly beautiful. Lucian dropped to his knees in the puddles of water, ignoring the burning agony in his own shoulder. He reached out, pulling Eli by the waist until the boy was practically resting in his lap. You shot him, Lucian whispered, his tone a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a dark, obsessive reverence. Eli let out a shaky breath, resting his forehead against Lucian's chest. He was going to kill you, Eli mumbled, his voice thick with emotion. I couldn't let him kill you. Lucian's heart slammed against his ribs. He wrapped his arms around Eli, burying his face in the boy's damp hair. The sheer magnitude of what had just happened washed over him. The underworld had tried to strip everything away from him, to burn his empire to the ground, all to prove that his love was a fatal flaw. But instead, the fire had only forged them into something unbreakable. You belong to the dark now, little bird, Lucian murmured, kissing the crown of Eli's head, his lips moving down to trace the delicate line of his ear. There is no going back to the light. The Commission thinks they destroyed me today. They don't know that they just set me completely free. I'm going to build a new empire, Eli. One built entirely in the shadows. And when I take my throne back, I want you ruling by my side. Eli lifted his head, his amber eyes locking onto Lucian's obsidian gaze. The fear, the hesitation, the longing for his old, quiet life. All of it had been completely washed away in the bloody waters of their survival. He reached up, his small hands gently cupping Lucian's rugged, scarred face. I don't care about thrones or empires, Eli said softly, his thumbs brushing over the mafia boss's cheekbones. I just want you. In the dark, in the fire, wherever you go, Lucian. I am yours. A desperate, feral groan escaped Lucian's throat. He crushed his lips against Eli's in a bruising, passionate kiss that tasted of salt, blood, and an eternal, unyielding vow. It wasn't the kiss of a monster claiming his prey. It was the kiss of a king bowing to his savior. As the Tartarus glided silently through the deepest, uncharted waters of the ocean, carrying them toward a new, terrifyingly beautiful future, Eli closed his eyes and melted into the embrace. The innocent boy from the cafe was dead, left behind in the ashes of the old world. In his place was the heart, the soul, and the absolute weakness of the most dangerous man on earth, and he wouldn't have it any other way. End of story. Welcome back to your BL boyfriend. Today, we are diving deep into the breathtaking, dark, and intensely passionate story of Lucian and Eli. In this thrilling journey where the action and romance never slowed down for a single second, we witness not just a mafia war, but how two souls irrevocably transformed each other. Let's look at Lucian Falcone first. For 15 years, Lucian was an emotionless machine, a king who fed exclusively on power and fear. But on that rainy night, the innocent hand Eli extended to him created a crack in those impenetrable walls. To Lucian, Eli wasn't just a boy he fell in love with. He was the only entity that represented his humanity and perhaps his soul. The fact that he didn't hesitate to take on the Rossi family and the entire underground world showed us just how obsessive and destructive this love truly was. Lucian was the absolute embodiment of dark romance, a man willing to set the world on fire for his love. And what about Eli? In the beginning, he was just an ordinary art student living a quiet life in pastel colors. But as the story progressed, we all saw that Eli was far from just a fragile character waiting to be saved. That unwavering courage he showed while looking into the camera when he was Lorenzo's captive, and the most striking moment of all, the final scene in the submarine. Eli pulling that trigger without a second thought to protect Lucian wasn't the loss of his innocence like a victim. It was him willingly embracing the darkness within himself to survive and protect the man he loved. Instead of begging to return to the light, Eli chose to sit on his own throne within Lucian's darkness. This story took the opposites attract theme and elevated it to a whole new level, blending it in a circle of blood, gunpowder, and betrayal. Eli, who initially seemed like prey that had fallen into the hands of a monster, transformed by the end of the story into that monster's greatest weapon and the only master he bowed to. While the High Commission of the Underworld thought they had destroyed them at the bottom of the ocean, they actually triggered the birth of an unstoppable empire and an invincible duo. What do you guys think about this epic ending? Was Eli pulling the trigger in the submarine the ultimate proof of his love, or the complete destruction of his innocence? Be sure to share your own theories and thoughts with me in the comments. I will read and reply to every single one. If you enjoyed this story and our analysis, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to your BL boyfriend for brand new, thrilling BL stories. Turn on the notification bell so you can be the first to discover our next adventures. Stay in the dark, stay passionate. See you in our next story. Take care of yourselves.